What's up guys, and welcome to another Blender tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how to recreate this infinite starry tunnel. Now this tutorial was actually requested by one of my followers on Instagram. I'm actually always open to suggestions on tutorials, so I encourage you to follow me on there, have a browse through my page, and if you see anything you like, just leave a comment. I'll be leaving my handle down below. Now I can't make a tutorial on everything there as my time is limited, but I will choose the ones with the most requests. And if you can't wait for the tutorial on one of my renders, feel free to browse my website on the VJ Loop store page where you can find all of my weekly renders. A purchase of one of these renders will include the Blender project file for you to play around with. Or alternatively, you can sign up to my Patreon for only £10 a month, where I'll be releasing monthly packs containing all of my renders and their relative Blender project files. Right, with that out of the way, let's get on with the tutorial. Alright, so once you've got Blender open, first thing we're going to do is delete the default cube. So hit X and delete. We're going to add a mesh and we're going to add cylinder. Now first thing I want you to do is to hit tab, takes you into edit mode. We're going to go to face select and we're going to select that face here. Hit X, delete faces, come to the other side, hit X, delete faces. So we've got a nice hollow tunnel. Now stay in edit mode and hit A, so you select all of the vertices, and we're going to hit RX90. Now with everything still selected, we're going to hit SY8 and just hit enter. Next step, we're going to select this loop cut tool here. So select that, change the number of cuts to 32. Now bring your cursor to the center of this cylinder. You should see a line following the circumference of the cylinder. Just click there and that should make 32 cuts along the cylinder. Now come back here and go back to box select. Now in edit mode, hit A again so you select everything. I want you to hit F3 on your keyboard. That's going to allow you to search functions, and I want you to search edge split, and you need to select this one, faces and edges by vertices. That's basically going to separate all of these faces by the edges, and it's going to allow us to do some interesting things with modifiers later down the line. With that done, come out of edit mode, so hit tab again, come to your modifier section here, this little spanner. We're going to add a modifier and we're going to add the smooth modifier. Now this smooth modifier will not work like this if you do not do the edge split step. So yeah, make sure you follow that step. And if you come to the modifier settings here, you can play around with the FAC, and that basically controls the size of the gaps in between each face. Now we're going to add another modifier, and we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier. And this is going to create some really interesting shapes that form around the tunnel. You need to make sure that the subsurf modifier is on top of the smooth. So in order to do that, just click on this little thing here and just drag it up so that the subdivision modifier is on top. And you want to make sure that it's on Cat Mall Clock. This is important to create those interesting star patterns. Now you want to set the levels view and the render to 1, and you just got to play around with this factor on the smooth modifier until you get some cool star shapes. So I think about there looks good. You can also pump up the repeat as well, which will give you sort of bigger stars. It will give you a sort of different variation of shape. Also, if you pump up the subdivision levels, you'll get different shapes as well. So yeah, just play around with these settings until you get some shapes you like. You don't want to go too crazy with it though, because it starts to get quite destructive. And also, if you are changing the subdivision settings, make sure your render output to the same number as your level viewport. Otherwise your render won't look the same. And if you hold shift while you play around with the FAC, it gives you more subtle adjustments if you want to get that exact shape that you're looking for. So now that our tunnel's set up, we're going to actually displace it a bit. So in order to do that, we're going to add a modifier. We're going to add a displaced modifier. You can say that's created some really weird sort of patterns. That's because, again, the hierarchy is really important with this. You want the displaced modifier at the top, so that it's just affecting the shape of the base mesh before any of these modifiers are taking effect. So yeah, make sure your displaced modifier is at top, then subdivision surface, and then smooth modifier. That's your hierarchy there. So you want to come here on your displaced modifier. The displaced one is the one with the little triangles here, okay? So yeah, add a new texture, and you can see it's sort of squished everything in. That's because we haven't actually assigned a texture to the modifier yet. So we're going to go to this little bit here, texture properties. On type, we're going to set this to clouds. We're going to set this to clouds, and we're going to pump the size all the way up, and we're going to drop the depth down as well, and that's looking pretty cool. Now next step, we're going to actually control the displacement by using an empty. So I want you to hit Shift A, add an empty, and we're going to add an empty cube, and we're going to go back to our cylinder here, and we're going to go back to the modifier section, and on your Displaced modifier, go to the drop down of the coordinate and change that to object, and on objects you want to select your empty. Now that you've done that, you've basically assigned this empty to control the displacement of the object. So next step, we're going to animate this empty. So bring up your timeline, we're going to set this to 240, and on the rotation parameter we're going to apply a keyframe to the first frame, and we're going to use the x-axis. So apply a keyframe on the x-axis on the first frame of your timeline. Now hit shift and right arrow, that will take you to the end, and then hit the arrow again, so you go to 241. The reason we set it to 241 is because if you're dealing with looping animations, if you set the end frame to 240, it's not really going to loop properly. You're going to end up rendering out a duplicate frame. So it's always best to give an extra frame in your animation to ensure you don't get a sort of glitchy artifact when you render out the animation. Now that we've got that established, we're going to go to the rotation parameter here, change this to 360, and apply a keyframe. Now hit A, T, change the interpolation to linear, and now hit play. And as you can see, as this cube rotates, what it's doing is it's basically moving this black and white data of your texture and applying it to the mesh. It's quite hard to see with this type of texture. If we use a different texture, it would be a bit more clear, but we're just going to stick with this one for now because I like the way it moves. And here are some things you can do as well. If you want to tame out the displacement, a few ways you can do that is to go to your modifier section, and you can just drop the strength. We'll set it to about 0.5. That just tames out the sort of waves a bit. And another way you can do it as well is scale up the empty. That will tame it out a bit as well. You basically just want to find a balance of the two until you find a sort of way of movement that you like, and then you can always as well go to your texture and play around with the depth and size as well. I like to keep a low depth, and if you want more ripples you can drop the size as well. Yeah, just have a play around with those parameters until you find a sort of wave pattern that you like. Right, so next step is to extend the tunnel. Now normally when you loop tunnels you just duplicate it and just move it along so that the tunnels sort of join together. Now the problem with doing that when you're working with displacement is because of the random nature of the textures and displacement, they don't always join together properly. So what I like to do is I like to actually use a mirror modifier so that I know that any start point and end point is going to perfectly align as it displaces. I'll show you how to do that real quick, and then we can extend the tunnel. So you want to click on your cylinder, just go back into edit mode, and then hit A again, making sure that you have all of these faces selected on your cylinder. And we're going to hit G, Y, and we're going to hit -8. This varies depending on your scaling, but you basically want to make sure that the end of your tunnel falls precisely onto the world origin where that 3D cursor is. And the reason you need to do that is because that's what the mirror modifier is going to use as the mirror point. So we're going to come out of edit modes, and we're going to go to our cylinder again, go to the modifiers, and we're going to add another modifier, and this time we'll add the mirror modifier. Now you want to scroll down to the bottom where your mirror modifier is now. Remove X, and we're going to have this go along the Y-axis. So now as you can see, the object is perfectly mirrored from the center point of the scene. Great, so with that done, let's start extending this tunnel. So what I want you to do is to select your cylinder. I want you to hit M on the keyboard. We're going to add a new collection, and we're going to call this tunnel. So now our cylinder is inside this collection, and we're going to create a collection instance. So hit Shift A, collection instance, add tunnel. Now with this new instance we're going to hit GY32, and the reason why we hit 32 is because the tunnel was originally 16, but with the mirror modifier it's doubled it in length. So in order to connect the start point precisely to the end point, you need to factor that in. So with this instance selected now, we're going to hit Shift D, Y32, So it duplicates the instance, and now we're going to hit Shift R, Shift R, Shift R, Shift R, Shift R. Just keep hitting Shift R. So you've got about 10 of them, and that should be fine. Now all you got to do is select your camera, hit Alt G to reset the location, Alt R to reset the rotation, hit RX90, which faces it along the Y-axis, and now we're going to hit GY -16, and that's going to bring the camera precisely to the start of the tunnel. And now if you hit 0, you can see inside the tunnel. Cool. So now all we've got to do is just animate this camera passing through the tunnel. Select your camera, go to your timeline, go to the first frame of your scene, and we're going to add a keyframe on the y-axis of the location parameter, and we're going to come to the end, so hold shift, right arrow again without holding shift that time, takes you to 241, and we're going to change the Y to 16, and we're going to add a keyframe. Now hit A, T and linear. That basically is the interpolation of the camera animation. You want it to be linear because by default Blender sets it to Bezier. Bezier basically smooths out the animation. It's good for things that sort of accelerate and decelerate. But as the camera is just passing through infinitely, you don't want it to smooth out, as it will basically come to a halt and then start again as your animation comes to end. We just want it to infinitely pass through. So with that done, let's hit play and let's have a look. Now I'm just going to tidy up this bit here. I don't like all these instances being there, so I'm going to highlight all of them, hit M, add a new collection, and we'll call that inst. That way we can just collapse that folder there and have a nice tidy collection. Let's jump into rendered mode and start giving some life to the scene. So hit Z and then 8. That's going to take you into render mode. But I always advise you to actually save before you do that, because Blender can crash. Great. So with that done, let's delete this light. We don't need the light. We're going to go to our world settings here, change the color to black, so we've got a nice dark scene. Click on your cylinder, come to the shader editor here. We're going to add a new material. We're just going to do something really simple. We're just going to make it an emission so that the tunnel emits light. Now we're going to set the strength to about 8. Pick a color. I'm going to go with blue. We're going to go to our scene settings here. We're going to be using Eevee because it's nice and fast, and I'm running on a laptop, so I can't actually handle cycles. We're going to select bloom, give our stars a nice little glow, bring the intensity down. I find the Eevee bloom a bit strong, so yeah, just bring that down. You can add motion blur, just see how it looks first, render out one frame. It might sort of ruin the effect of the stars. I'm just going to render out a frame and see how that looks. Yeah, it does kind of screw up the stars a bit. You can have it, maybe just drop the shutter down, so it's not too, it's good to smooth things out a bit, but yeah, maybe drop the shutter down, we'll see how that looks. Yeah, that looks good. And you know what, I'm actually going to change my star pattern. I think they're a bit too big, to be honest. I want them to be a bit smaller. Like I said, this is the great thing about working with modifiers, doing things procedurally. You can easily make edits as well. So all we got to do is just play around with this this smooth modifier, and we can get different patterns that we like. That may be a little bit smaller. Yeah, maybe like that. I think that looks good. Going to change the camera focal length as well. Bring it out a bit. Say about 20. The smaller you make the focal length, the wider the lens is. So it actually gives you illusion that the camera's moving a bit faster. So yeah, and if you want to pump it all the way up, you can. I don't think that looks too great, to be honest. I prefer it with a wide angle. I'm going to go to the color management as well. Back in our scene settings, and I'm going to set it to very high contrast, just so the colors pop a bit more. In fact, I've changed my mind about the displace. I want to actually change the texture. I'm going to change it to the marble texture. I'm going to bring the size all the way up and the turbulence down, because I want to change the sort of displace pattern. I think something like that might look a bit cooler. but I'm also going to play around with the empty rotation. That looks cool. Right, so go back to your texture settings, change the type to marble, bring the size up, bring the depth all the way down, and we're just going to scale up this empty as well. So hit S, scale up the empty, so it's quite big. We're going to change the, we're going to delete these keyframes on the X, delete keyframes, apply keyframe on the Y. We're going to rotate on the Y axis instead because I like the rotation a little bit more. So change that to 360, apply keyframe to 241, same steps, A, T, linear, and hit play. I like that a lot more. That's a lot cooler. You just got to play around with shit until it looks good, and don't be afraid to try new things, because the more you try new things, when you're stuck on something, you're going to suddenly get an idea in your head of, oh, I remember that worked in that situation, I'm going to apply it to this. The more you experiment, the more sort of ammo you have in your brain to come up to find things to fill in the gaps of problems you're having. Just a random thought I had. But yeah, that looks really cool. I like that. Yeah, cool. So I'm going to bring out the focal length again. Still like it wider. And that's pretty much it, man. I'm going to actually do some light compositing on it because I want the stars to sort of sparkle a bit because they are stars and everyone likes a twinkly star. So what we're going to do is we're going to render out an image. So hit F12, just render out one frame. With that rendered out, just come out of rendered mode. We're going to go to our compositing tab, select news nodes, hit N on your keyboard to get rid of that. We'll drag this composite output node. We're going to hit Shift A. We're going to select output viewer, pop that there, plug this into there, and this is going to allow us to see our render. Hold Shift, right click, it's going to connect these wires together, and I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to add a glare node. I'm going to pop that in between, and this should give us, we're going to change the glare to high. I'll go over that again because I was kind of experimenting as I went along. Add your glare node, this drop down box to be set to streaks. You want the quality set to high. Set your iterations to 4. Color modulation, we'll put that at 6. Mix, set that to negative 0.5. Threshold, set that to 0.1. Streaks, we'll set that to 4. Leave 0 on the angle offset, and on fade leave that at 0.9. And I'm going to add a lens distort node because I really like this node. I think I probably overuse it on my renders now, but since I found out it was there, I just always add it to everything. So you want to hit Shift A, add distort, and add a lens distortion, and you want to pop that after your glare node. And just pump up your dispersion, and we'll set that. I think it looks good quite high, gives you that sort of hyperspace jump sort of look. Maybe it's a bit too much. I think I'll leave it at 0.4 and we'll call that a day. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Save what you got, Control S. Only thing left to do is to render out the animation. Come to your output settings here, change the output folder. If you want a higher frame rate, you can change the frame rate here. Just bear in mind you need to rekey in your animations, probably extend your timeline length if you're gonna up the frame rate. Otherwise the animation is gonna be really quick. Set your output settings to somewhere you can find it. I've got a little tutorial folder set up. File format, we'll set that to FFmpeg video. Encoding, you want that container to be MP4. Leave the video codec as H.264. Output quality, set that to perceptually lossless. And now all you've got to do is go to render and hit render animation, and you're done. Right, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, as it really helps me grow the channel. And feel free to tag me on your render. I'm most active on Instagram, so best to tag me through there. That's @nebmotion. I'll be leaving the handle down below. And like I said, feel free to have a browse on my profile, leave a comment on any render that you like, and I'm happy to make a tutorial on it. or alternatively you can purchase one of my renders from my website. Project files of my renders come with a purchase, so you can play around with any of my scenes through there. If you'd like the project file for this particular render, I've also got that on my website, and I'll be leaving a link to that below. You can also become a Patreon for only £3 a month for my tutorial project files. If you want to support me directly, that's great. You can up to £10 a month if you want to get my monthly VJ loot packs, which includes project files for all of the renders that I make. Or like I said, you can buy individual ones from my website, that's nevmotion.co.uk.